what I did is I built some fake e-commerce web pages when we were in Toronto, and basically I we were selling random products like sneakers and things that we knew would sell, but the store was completely fake. It was like alphasales.ph or some crazy domain we bought, and we would just create a bunch of landing pages for products. And under the price, we had buy now, but we also had finance or like buy now, pay later, buy this much per month or whatever. And you'd click on it, and then you'd have a sign up form. It was like a type form, right? So it's super rudimentary. It took us like a few hours to put together, and I ran probably $100 in AdWords or in Facebook ads. I don't remember, but that goes quite a long way. Probably like 1,000 clicks in the Philippines. So once I realized that people were willing to click on finance it and they were willing to go through an entire application flow. Back then it was completely random questions about your salary and stuff like that. But then that's when I got the solid, like the firm go ahead on there is a market for it. People are willing to go through an application process to get this fake sneaker from this fake store. So imagine on a real one. That was when we decided, okay, I'm going to move to the Philippines and we're going to build this. There's a market for it.
My name is Suken. I'm a managing partner at Iterative. Iterative is a YC style accelerator focused exclusively on Southeast Asia. Today we have Tim Grassin. Is that how you say it?
Correct.
Grassin?
Yeah. Very good.
Today we have Tim Grassin from TendoPay. Thanks for being here. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit of what TendoPay does?
Hey, Suken. Thanks for having me. I'm Tim Grassin, as you mentioned. I'm one of the founders of TendoPay, and I also manage growth. So TendoPay is a buy now, pay later company located in the Philippines, where I've been based for 2.5 years. I'm originally from France, but traveled all over and built a few businesses back in Canada. So that's just about me.
Cool. And I want to kind of dig in a little bit about kind of like all the way at the very beginning. So you were born in France, but you didn't grow up in France,
Yeah, that's
right?
correct. I did grow up for the first 6 years, and then my dad being a diplomat, we sort of moved around quite a lot. So we traveled throughout Europe, a bit of Africa, and then I decided to go and study in Canada. So yeah, no real French background, but mostly European, I'd say.
Okay. And I mean, moving around a lot, I think as a kid is like an interesting kind of like influence probably on you. What kind of kid were you growing up?
Yes, it's definitely an interesting trajectory as a kid because basically every 3 to 4 years we pick up and go. You have to adapt to an entirely new environment, and I'm talking about going from -20 in Finland to +30 in Kenya. So new languages, new cultures, new people, and as a kid you have to adapt. Yeah, you have to conquer that. So I don't know if it impacted my entrepreneurship that much, but it did impact me as a person. I think it made me quite social and quite curious about new things. And the exposure to different cultures, I think, just made me want to always dive deeper into wherever I moved, and also made me want to move constantly, basically. Staying in Canada for 12 years was the longest I'd ever stayed anywhere. I spent 5 or 6 years in Montreal and the rest in Toronto. But by the sixth year in Toronto, I had the itch to move, and that's why TendoPay in the Philippines was such a perfect project for me, basically.
I don't, you and I talked a little bit before, but my brother and I used to move every 9 months, I think, too.
Wow.
So I went to I think like 6 or 7 different schools before I was 10. And
Military parents
my
or
No, my father used to be he worked for Intel like
okay,
very early on, since like the late 70s. I was almost born in Barbados actually.
very cool. I love
And
Barbados.
he was oh, I've never been. My parents always tell
Amazing.
me kind of like stories about it, but
I
like
go
I
for
gotta
kite
go.
surfing. It's beautiful.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Next time I go, actually, next time, well, whenever we can travel,
Yeah.
I'll have to ask you for recommendations. I always thought my dad was basically Intel's fixer. He worked in their manufacturing and factories, and so he used to go to the worst performing factory and fix it. And so we would move
Okay.
every like 9 months. But I always kind of thought that I don't, and maybe this is like connecting the dots after the fact, but that it helped make me kind of more adaptive.
Yes.
And a lot of startups is kind of like you just need to adapt. You're like constantly kind of doing stuff, but
Hmm.
um, I don't know if that's a story I just told myself about myself.
Yeah, I mean, it
But I
could
don't.
be
Do you have a similar
true.
thing?
I've never tried to associate one with the other, but it is true that having to adapt is basically the bread and butter of a startup, right? You have new problems, you have to overcome them, figure out a solution, usually try to figure out the best solution and move on. So I guess you're right. It does have an impact when, as a child, you're exposed to adaptation quite a lot, and it's sort of mandated to you. You don't really have a choice, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you do. Yeah, I don't know if you felt the same way, but I never thought that that kind of childhood was different because it was the only one that I knew, and so I just kind of assumed everybody else was like that. And it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, okay, that's somewhat unique.
I completely relate to that. So whenever I would come home to France for the summer, because thankfully my dad would have rather long vacations during the summer, so we'd go back every summer, and I'd see my old friends or my cousins or whatever, and they'd have this sort of hometown ecosystem that I didn't have. So I was always kind of jealous of them having these friends that they've known forever or this school that they've been frequenting forever. But at the end of the day, I learned that I could live without it, and I actually enjoyed the benefits of my lifestyle as well.
Okay, so you and I are actually even more similar because we moved around a lot, but spent every summer in Malaysia. That was
Wow.
always kind
Okay.
of like home base. So it was
Yeah.
like, you're moving around a lot, but every summer was in Malaysia. So
Yeah, and I mean,
pretty similar.
I don't know if your family did the same thing, but my dad still has very good family values. So every summer, no matter what year, we would reunite with my entire family, like cousins and everything, usually 30 to 40 people. We'd take a week together, and we've been perpetrating that tradition ever since I was probably 6. Now, like 10 years ago, we bought this big summer house in France, and we bring the entire family together for a week, which I missed this year because of COVID, but it was the first time in 15 years, right? So pretty crazy.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, similar. I mean, we don't get to the big whole family doesn't get together as much now, but when we stayed in Malaysia, I lived with my grandmother.
Okay,
So it was like traditional Chinese home. So it was like
very
there was
nice.
like three or four families living in the same home, right? And I used to sleep in the bunk beds with
And
like
you
my
had
grandmother
cousins,
every
I'm
summer and
sure,
stuff.
and
So
it was very
tons,
fun.
yeah. It was like, I mean, there's like 15 people in the house,
I
and
love
it's
that.
like that whole thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is great.
that's also
Um,
important as an entrepreneur. Is like interacting with so many different people and having to, not be likable, but be sociable and just being able to adapt to any type of conversation because you're exposed to 30 different people at once. That's super cool too.
And I guess you probably had to like, I mean, if you were a diplomat's son, you probably also have to go to social function. I mean, there's a lot of functions I can imagine as diplomats, right? So you probably have to like learn from an early age how to like carry yourself in kind of these places where it's like, okay, I talk to this person and
Yeah, so definitely a bit of that, especially towards my teenage years where we were old enough to attend those functions or be conscious of them, basically. But I would say that on top of that, my final country with my parents, which was Kenya, where I moved when I was
wow.
14 or 15. And basically, I was this fully functional human being, and I had ideas and I had ambitions, and things were starting to grow. Like I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after high school. At that very moment, I was exposed to some very influential people. All of their kids were attending my school. So all of my
Mm.
friends' parents were either CEOs, very high positions in NGOs or ambassadors and whatnot. And that kind of exposed me to a lot of things that I had no idea about. So this there's absolutely no vanity in what I'm saying, but just being exposed to playing in these mansions, going playing golf, and all these things that I had no idea about kind of gave me a taste of what life could be that I didn't know about. And sort of talking to my friends' fathers who are extremely influential or very, very smart or great at what they do just made me want to become like that because of course you have your dad and usually that's your role model growing up, but when you're exposed to more people like that, I think overall it just makes it feel possible to attain these types of levels in life, which again, it's not the material aspects, it's sort of feeling like you can be the best at what you do no matter what you choose, and you have exposure to that and they kind of explain to you how they got there. So that's awesome. That was really useful, and I kind of I'm blessed that I managed to have that lifestyle as well.
Yeah, that totally resonates with me because my I was the same thing, but it was going to business dinners. So my father would always, I mean, like, it's exactly the same as you. It's like when I was like teenager, and you're kind of like you can kind of go to these things and
Hmm.
talk. I would go to dinners with businesses. My dad, he's like, hey, you should learn how to kind of this stuff works. And I think it's kind of the reason we're doing this podcast a little bit, right? It's like when you get some exposure to some of these people, and you just kind of realize that they're like kind of regular people who are kind of in these positions and stuff, and they've worked quite hard, and you kind of hear their stories and stuff, but it makes it more relatable. Um, the other thing for me, at least, was I coming from that kind of background and kind of growing up, I don't really get intimidated by people nowadays.
Hmm.
Like I've had some friends who maybe I mean, it's a big privilege that I think we were able to do this, but I have some friends who maybe didn't grow up like that. And when they meet like an investor or something like that, they're a little bit more kind of like intimidated because I haven't kind of talked to people like that a lot. But I think maybe you found it a similar thing where it's like you grew up kind of talking to people like this. And so on some level, you're like, they're just a person. Like that's the
Yeah.
thing to remember, right? Can kind of moving forward a fair bit. I feel like we could probably just have a personal conversation about growing up for a long time. So you graduated school. What did you study in school?
So I studied finance. I went to business school and I did finance as a specialty.
And then I was looking up your LinkedIn. You worked at a hedge fund for like a little while, and you went into finance for a couple of years.
Yeah. So speaking of people who influence your life a lot. So when I was living in the UK as a younger child, one of my best buddies, his dad was working in finance. I didn't know about it at the time. I just knew that, hey, this guy's house is awesome, and his dad's always going away to Hong Kong. Like, I wonder what he does. That's when you're
Yeah,
10 years old. But I
yeah.
stayed in touch with this guy over time. And when I was doing my prep school, so in France, when you want to go to business school, you have to do 2 years of prep school. So it's like an
Oh,
intense, very selective process of learning everything you can about entrance exams for business schools. And then you basically, based on your scores at that, you get put in the best business schools and so forth. So I was doing that in France. And during that time, they kind of encourage you to do an internship to figure out what you want to sort of specialize yourself in during business school. So I completely randomly reached out to my buddy in the UK and asked if his dad had any openings for an internship. I kind of dabbled a little bit in finance. I was interested by the stock market, but nothing very specific. So I reached out to him and he said, look, very happy to have you on board as an intern. I didn't know what he did, to be honest. I knew it was something in finance, something in London. He told me, okay, this is a list of books you have to read. This is what you have to learn before you come. Like, I want to make sure your math levels are this and that. So thankfully, I had all that. And basically, it turned out to be a fund of hedge funds. So what they did is they had institutional money and then they would place it into various hedge funds. So kind of similar to like a venture cap that invests in a bunch of different funds or different companies. It was super interesting. So I spent 4 months in London, being exposed to all these different hedge funds, super smart guys from quants to like, there's a variety of different hedge funds, but basically got exposed to that. And at that point, I was like, okay, I really like finance. It's super interesting. It's basically utilizing my brain as much as possible, and there's a very good compensation outcome from that. So why not? And there's a lot of opportunity to travel. And basically, my buddy's father told me, look, if you graduate with this and this from business school, do 2 years of investment banking, then I'll hire you. So that was my trajectory at that point. I thought, man, that sounds really easy. Like, I'm already about to go to business school, investment banking for 2 years. I have no idea what investment banking was, but I said, sure, why not? And that was basically the idea. But what happened is I ended up going to business school and I studied for investment banking, did all the finance. And then I did a couple internships during business school to learn more about what finance really was on a day-to-day basis, how it was in Montreal versus the UK, because it's very different, and that's where I probably have to do it for 2 years. And I realized on a day-to-day basis that what I was doing was not as exciting as what I was exposed to in London during my internship. It was kind of routine, and basically the hierarchy in finance was just so heavy that you'd have to
mm,
stay in the office and be the latest to leave or the last to leave the office. There were all these rules, and this is also from my childhood. I've always been raised to kind of challenge rules, and my boss, after 2 years of back and forth internships, just told me, "Look, I really like you. You're a smart guy, but you're very insubordinate. I don't think investment banking will be for you. You'll be miserable in investment banking. You'd be better off doing your own thing. And that was kind of like the key. I never thought about doing my own thing ever. Like I told you my entire background, never did it come to mind that
Yeah.
I would build a business one day. So that was kind of the trigger for me to start exploring entrepreneurship. And back then, startups were super hot. You'd always hear about all these Silicon Valley startups. And I'm talking around 2009. So right after the
Okay. Yeah.
financial crisis, there were all these new startups that were blooming. So Facebook was blowing up, Twitter, and basically tech was in. It still is, but back then it was really like every guy's dream to have a tech startup. So I told myself, and I hope I don't babble too much, but I told myself I really want to build a tech startup at some point. I have no idea what it's going to be, but I have to do it. And I don't know if I'm already like stepping into your future questions, but what happened is I graduated. I had $5,000 to my name, and I know in Asia that might seem like a lot, but in Canada that's basically 2.5 months of rent. So I didn't have that much to fall back on, and I had to figure out a way to make that money work uh, to build something. So essentially, I had this vision to build a tech company, but what happened is I ended up building a service company that would enable me to get cash flow rapidly. Because that's you read about people building tech companies and it could take years before they make money. They have to raise funds. When you're a fresh graduate and you have no background, like, no history or anything, it's very hard to raise money, right? Especially in Canada, it's not Silicon Valley. So instead, I decided to build a service business, and it's super random, but you probably saw in my LinkedIn this company I built called Stinson Design. So
Hmm.
what it was is during my finance days, all I was doing every day except modeling in Excel was doing presentation decks, whether it's for
Yep.
a fundraise or pitching our company or whatever. I was the one doing the pitch decks, which made no sense because I had no design background. I was not the most like I was not the most knowledgeable about what we did. I knew it, but somehow the role of building presentations just falls back on the junior. And during university, I had a friend of mine who was excellent at doing presentation. He was kind of mandated by our group of friends to always do their presentations, and he was doing them in this cool, back then, a cool software called Keynote, which was just sort of emerging, and he was really like blowing minds with professors because the keynotes were really compelling, beautifully designed. They had animation. So I just reached out to my buddy and I said, "Look, I know you don't have a job because you told me and you're looking. I want to build a business. Would you be interested in doing presentations for a living?" And this was kind of like I'm trying to project myself back then, and I had no idea where I pulled that idea out of. But basically, it was a combination of me doing that as a job and knowing someone who does it, and realizing that there must be a better way, like than to give it to the junior guy. Maybe give a little professional edge to your presentation. So that's when Stinson Design was born. And essentially, I had a deadline of 2.5 months to start making money before I had to either find a job or go back to my parents' house in France, which was not an option.
Uh,
So do you want me to continue on
Tim, let me
that
jump.
trajectory, or do you want to?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But let me. I want to go back to two parts. What books did that guy ask you to read? Like he was like, here's a summer list. Like, what books did he ask you to read?
So I don't remember the entire list. There was 10 books, but I remember some that really impacted me. So one of them was Liar's Poker. I don't know if it rings a
Okay.
bell. Very finance book, and the other one was Too Big to Fail: The Rise and Fall of Long-Term Capital Management (LTCM). Great books,
Yep.
and those really teach you what finance was in the 80s and 90s. Super exciting. Yeah, very very testosterone driven. I don't know. It was something that appealed to me. So yeah,
Yeah.
those were the books.
Huh, that's interesting. I feel like I mean I just didn't have much visibility into finance. I mean I never was a finance person. Although my father wanted me to be a quant. He
Oh
was like, "Oh,
wow.
you do CS and math? Like move to New York and be a quant." He was like, "You should. That's your path. You should do that." And I was like, "That doesn't sound
Definitely.
fun at all." Um, but I think the thing I've since read quite a bit about finance, and I think the thing that surprised me about finance was that it continues to develop. It's like a field, right? Like there
Hmm.
was theories and ways to do stuff decades ago that no longer are kind of done, and
Yep.
portfolio theories kind of evolve. And so I don't know. I just kind of thought it was like a static kind of area where it was like, yeah, people move money around and invest stuff, but actually it kind of evolves quite a bit, and there's new theories and research
Oh,
is done and all
absolutely. Yeah,
that. So it's fascinating.
definitely. It's quite fascinating, but it is it's a bit of a dinosaur overall. So if you're someone
Yeah.
who's hyperactive, has a bit of ADD, and needs to get stuff done quickly, it's not a good place to be.
The other part that I thought was interesting too is that the insubordinate part is literally a description that I people had told me. They
Hmm.
were like, "You're really good, but you're kind of a pain in the ass, right?
Yep.
You're always asking why, and you
Yep.
like just question things all the time, right?
Hmm.
Where do you think that comes from for you? Like, I mean, I don't. Is that were your parents that way? Was it like I don't know something in your
No,
upbringing? Where do
no,
you
my
think it
parents
comes
are fairly conservative.
from? I mean, I guess they're diplomats. Like they kind of have to be a little bit, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I came from a Christian upbringing, so usually we don't ask so many questions. Otherwise you start to question religion itself.
Yeah, really big
Uh,
things. Yep.
yeah, but I came from a family of four kids, and so you kind of have to fight for everything. You debate
Mm,
everything. You talk a lot, and yeah, you kind of question things. I don't know. Honestly, it's a good question. I have no idea where it came from, but as a kid, I was always like that. I was always sort of questioning, or like you couldn't just tell me, don't do this. I'd be like, sure, but why? Like I'm
right.
totally fine not doing something if you give me a rational explanation. I'm not just going to take your word for it. So I think some of us have that intrinsically. I don't know.
I've always tried to. I think this is a thing that a lot of entrepreneurs have, and so it's just like we just end up in these places because it's like we just suck as
Hmm.
employees. Like we're
Yeah.
just terrible. And I always debate whether it's like a nature nurture thing. I mean, it's never just one or the other. But your in your family of with your siblings are they kind of like you, or is it kind of everybody is different?
Yeah. So they are kind of like me. I'm the eldest, by the way. I have a younger sister and two
Okay.
younger brothers who are twins. And it's funny. So my sister sort of went in biology for her studies. And then I don't know if I had any impact on her life, but then she decided to become a consultant and be like her own boss. So that's what she's been doing for the last 2 years. My one of my brothers is a lawyer in Kuwait, so he got the travel bug, but he's more
Wow,
like the standard type of traditional career
but still
guy.
Kuwait.
Yeah, still Kuwait, totally random. And then my other brother, he's also an entrepreneur. So he built a company, I think 5 years ago in Malaga, and since then he got married to a Lithuanian, and now he's living in Lithuania, and he's also still running that business. So definitely something in our upbringing turned us into more or less entrepreneurs and travelers. That's the easy one to
Yeah,
figure out.
yeah. That's interesting. I feel like your siblings are all like I'm sure they all have like great stories. Like it sounds like your family is just interesting. Um,
Thanks.
going back to the going back to the like Stinson design part and that part of it. So it was like you're basically like I mean it's I feel like that whoever your boss was who was told you was like, hey, I don't think you're gonna want to do this. Like you should kind of do your own thing. I don't know if they probably didn't think about how much of an impact that has, but like that's I think in hindsight that probably is like kind of a big thing. It's like a nice thing for them to kind of like say, right?
Definitely an inflection point in my life, and actually I've already told my old boss, and I've stayed in touch with him, and I've
Yeah.
kind of thanked him for it, basically, because he did have a major impact on my career. uh, I don't know if he meant it in a good way or not, but it did have a
Yeah.
positive
Yeah.
impact on my life.
So, and when you started doing it, I mean, you were kind of like, you just quit cold turkey. You were like, you had this conversation with him, and then you were like, kind of soon after, you're like, quit, only got $5,000 in the bank. And like, you quit not really having a plan. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's 100% fair to say. I quit, and I said I'm going to spend 2 months in France. So I quit in June, and then I
Okay.
spent 2 months in France. I was discussing ideas with my buddy, the guy, the keynote guy. I was
Yeah.
discussing ideas because I wanted to figure out what exactly we would build. Because back then, a presentation design agency did not exist. Actually, there was one called Duarte that was basically doing presentations for Apple, officially as an agency, but it didn't exist. No one paid to get professional presentations unless they hired a consultant internally, but there was no agency for it. So kind of had to create that concept from scratch and figure out if it would take, right? Like, and I didn't really have a proof of concept in the sense that I had a negative proof of concept when I had already seeded the idea to my old boss, told him that I wasn't very good at presentation and that we should hire someone to do them. And he told me, look, historically, it's been your role as a junior, so we don't have a budget for it, and I don't think it's necessary. So I was already on the right track to fail, but didn't sort of deter me.
And what, so what did you guys, so you, I mean, this is like a thing now. Like I know at YC before demo day, it's like sometimes there's like, people start passing around referrals for like making
Yeah.
decks and stuff. So I think in the start,
So
and by the way, for all the
since in
audience out
design,
there,
we've done
for all,
probably 20 YC decks in the past already.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
There you go. You might disagree with me since you were in this business, but just for the rest of the audience, like if you're working on your first deck, probably don't hire a designer. Like work on the content and the growth numbers first. Like don't worry about that yet, but
absolutely.
at some point it probably helps. Where did you guys get your first like couple customers? I mean, your boss was basically like, we're not going to pay for that. We have junior analysts to do that.
Yeah,
Where did
plot
you guys get
twist,
your
he
first couple of
decides to
customers?
work with us a few months later. But
Oh,
initially, yeah, the first few customers, I was basically networking. I had no experience in sales. I had no experience in anything. Let's be honest. I was young.
yeah.
Gosh,
How
I
old
was
were you?
21 or 22, something like that.
Okay. Yep.
Maybe 20. Yeah, 22, I'd say. And, I looked a lot younger than I do now. Suits were oversized and did not look professional at all. But somehow I had to convince senior level people to trust some funds into my little business, make them believe that we're going to bring some value, and to yeah, basically trust us. So I went to networking events. That was my first intuition, kind of
Oh,
an old school legacy of our business school. Business schools kind of teach you old fashioned ways of doing business. Everything you learn in business school is already obsolete by at least 5 to 10 years. So I was going to networking events, and every single networking event I could find online on Meetup or whatever, I would go to it with my little business cards and just try to get meetings. And thankfully, I managed to use my charms or something, and I secured a number of meetings in the first few months. And we actually signed our first client the second month already. Client was very small, but basically, this one I actually got it from Elance. Do you remember Elance? It's kind of
yeah,
like
yeah,
the,
yeah.
yeah,
Totally,
Upwork
totally.
or whatnot. So that was the second idea, was to start posting Stinson Design as an agency on Elance, trying to get contracts from there. So we started getting contracts, but I mean, the type of client you get on Upwork or Elance. It's like
Yeah.
pay as little as possible and have the highest expectations. So we were working on presentations for days on day, and basically our hourly rate was like below $10 by that time, but we were making revenue, right? So that's how we started surviving the first few months. And for me, having income was better than not. So we started doing that, and we built a portfolio. That was the key as well. Is we had no portfolio when I was pitching to these people at networking events. So when they wanted to see samples, I had nothing to show for. So we started building a portfolio on Elance, and we are just taking as many projects as we could. And the projects were ranging from 300 to 800 bucks. The first time we cracked 1,000, I was like, "Oh my god! We've discovered a pot of gold." It was crazy, and we
What was your pitch? What was your pitch at the networking events? You just like showed up in your oversized suit and you just like walk up to people and you're like, "Do you
absolutely
make
just
PowerPoint presentations? I will
no.
make them
I
for you."
mean, I'm a little more subtle than that. So I just build the
Okay.
relationship. I'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing here? Like, what are you guys trying to like? What are you trying to learn? This and that. Try to build conversations." I never did direct marketing. Like I was always trying to build a relationship, and then in a follow-up conversation, I'd talk a little bit about TendoPay. I'm too, the habit is now a force of habit with TendoPay. No,
Yeah.
about Citizen
Yeah.
Design.
Yeah.
So it was more of building a relationship, and that's why it didn't really have any fruits in the first few months. It took a longer time to get those local clients, physical clients, to give us any work. We also got some odd jobs on Elance, which I don't need to get into the details with you about because we want to keep it PG. But basically, we got
Oh,
some very interesting gigs on Elance that paid rent, basically, but were not fun to do at all. So that's how we survived the first few months. And then once we had a portfolio, the next thing we had to do was build a website. And right now, like, it's so easy to build a website with a template and whatnot, but 10 years ago, as a non-web developer, it was a nightmare. I had to learn everything because I didn't have the money to hire anyone, right? So I had to build a website somehow, and the themes were ugly as hell. Somehow it worked. Like, it enabled us to create a brand and to host our portfolio. And having that online presence helped when I was following up with these leads. Basically, by month
mm,
4, we signed our first big client in Montreal. It was an advertising agency. And the beauty there was they had basically a project flow. So they were giving us one project every 2 weeks. Basically, we were building a presentation on their behalf for another client. So they were passing money along to us. And there we were starting to make decent money. So the budgets were like 1,500 to 2,000 for a long
mm.
presentation, but it was still worth it. It was more than we ever made before. And I leveraged that name because it's a very well, it has a great reputation in Montreal. It's a very famous ad agency. And I started leveraging that name with other local players. And basically, that really helped build momentum. And I managed to sign, like, the fifth month, probably 5 or 6 local clients, which brought our revenue up to 10K for the month, which was a massive milestone, right? So
Yeah.
from then on,
Yeah.
it was just leveraging one thing to the other. But the biggest inflection point for that business was when I taught myself AdWords, because all of a sudden I managed to turn outbound sales, which were really time consuming and not very fruitful, into inbound sales. And I was terrible at it, but I managed to get leads, which was crazy. And then all of a sudden we started getting one lead a day, then two, then five. And I'm projecting myself in the future. By that time, I already
Yeah.
moved to Toronto and started getting an office and whatnot. But basically, like, Stinson really grew when we figured out AdWords and we figured out inbound sales. We were able to reach 10 leads a day by the time I sold it, and it was already making a few million a year. But basically, it was a very interesting progression once we went fully online and built an inbound sales strategy.
So it's interesting, just like picking up the like your progression with that business. It was like you basically, and it honestly it sounds exactly like a even like a tech startup. I mean, this was more of an agency, but it's like you basically hustled your butt off in the beginning, right? There was like nothing fancy about it. You just hustled your butt off,
Yep.
and that got you, and you just kept parlaying those gigs into a bigger gig, into more gigs and stuff,
Yep.
and then you're like, okay, we got to do this like website thing. I have no idea how to do this website thing. Then you're like, okay, I guess I just have to figure out how to do this. I mean, you weren't technical, it sounds
Not
like,
at
right? So
all.
you were just like, I got to make a website. So like you just went online and were like, how do I make a website? And then you learned
Yes.
that.
And then I learned about
Oh,
WordPress, which was like a godsend. And then I was browsing WordPress, and I can't remember the name, but there was a website that had a bunch of different templates. And back then, the templates were very rudimentary, but enough for me to look professional. And I
yeah.
started to learn to customize HTML, CSS, and this and that. And I was so proud. Like, it took me an entire week to build a decent website, which was probably 90% the template. But I was so proud to put out something that I did myself. And yeah, as a non-technical, when you build your first website, you're quite happy.
Yeah. And I feel like it's and then you learned AdWords. So how did you even hear about AdWords? So you're like, okay, I did this like website thing, and then
Yeah.
it just I feel like you kept running into these walls. You're like, okay, the business is going pretty well. We can't grow it any bigger if I'm just doing stuff. So
Yes.
I got to now do this outbound thing. Where did you hear about AdWords?
So, because we were online, I learned a little bit about SEO first because, like,
Ah,
that's the keyword with everyone's like, if you want to be
yeah,
referenced, you got to do SEO. So I was Googling, I was using stuff like SpyFu and trying to figure out who our competitors were, if any.
yep,
And one time I was Googling PowerPoint presentation agency, and I saw an ad for something completely irrelevant. It was something on another platform. I think it was even advertising Elance, but it was advertising PowerPoint presentation design or something on Elance. And I was like, whoa, okay, why don't I use these? Like, I'm sure people search for PowerPoint presentation design. And that's how I learned about AdWords, basically. I'd never really thought about it from a business perspective. I always kind of clicked on the, as a user without really paying attention. But then all of a sudden, I really got conscious of the impact of being on the first line of Google when people search it. So basically, I tried to learn everything I could about AdWords.
So was anybody kind of like, did you have any like mentors or anybody kind of like telling you about all this like
No.
stuff, or was it just like it was really you were just kind of figuring it out as you went?
Yeah. So no mentors, unfortunately, but like internet was my mentor. So I learned everything from YouTube, from Google. I mean, YouTube still to this day is my number one source of information.
Oh,
Everything I want to learn is on YouTube. I spent like shameful amounts of time on YouTube learning about anything from work to building a cabin to farming, fishing, hunting. Like anything you can think of, I want to learn, I go on YouTube. So that's what I did back then too. I learned about AdWords, I learned about business, I learned about web, everything there.
I mean, I learned about starting a podcast literally by watching YouTube videos. I was like, so what do you need to do, and
Yeah,
like all of
there's no
that
better
stuff.
way.
So, but it's such a, that's actually such a good I mean, YouTube, the internet, whatever, it's such a good skill to learn for entrepreneurs because like you just have to do this so often. So I think, when we are talking to founders, sometimes like we try to get a sense of like, are they good learners? Because
Hmm.
we want to teach them stuff and help them with stuff, but like there's no way we're going to be able to help them and teach them everything, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's such a good, like, it's great that you had that experience. And I think the flip part of it too is that you learned and then saw the benefits of it. And
Hmm.
that just reinforces like your ability to be like, oh, okay, I'll just learn this because I've done this in the past and it went well. So anything going forward, I can also just do that. And I feel like that attitude turns to be like a superpower.
Yeah. And I think that using internet to learn stuff, it's basically a question of timing in our childhood. I think we
Yeah.
were kind of the
Yeah.
generation that got computers when we were 10 to 12
Hmm.
maybe.
Hmm.
And with someone who's curious by nature will start to use it properly. And so every question I had, instead of asking my parents when I realized that they didn't have the answers to everything, like the internet had the answers I was looking for. So I exploited that, and it became like it's part of me now. Any question I have, I refer to my phone or to my laptop, but it's something that's not innate with everyone. So I'm noticing, and this is not now, they've evolved now, but my siblings back in the day, I was monopolizing the computer, so they never had that screen time, and it basically turned out that when they were teenagers and they had questions and they didn't know what to do with their computer, they would always ask me instead of Googling. And I got frustrated after a while. I don't remember, I don't remember what it was called, but there was this service you could use where you type the question for someone and send it back to them. And it's basically a Google search for that question, kind of like a, just use Google.
I remember that site.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I
Yes.
used to start doing that, and then they got more familiar with it. But it's really a question of timing. Like at one point in your life, you're so curious. If you have the right tools, you'll have the means of growing your, I don't know, your knowledge base. It's very interesting.
I feel like also maybe when we were, I think you and I are roughly about the same age. I think when we
Yep.
were growing up too, startups were like getting hot, but not nearly as popular. And certainly kind of information about how to do them was not as widely available as they were
Hmm.
now. And I feel like now it's like there's so much good information out there on like how to do startups and stuff. Like anybody who's an audience, like you can definitely learn a lot of like um, guides and just like best practices on how to do startups online. It is no substitute for actually doing it. I think when you actually do it, you find out that it's like the experience is quite different, but like
Hmm.
all the practical knowledge I feel like is out there.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there are entire courses that are practically
Yeah.
free where you can learn everything from ideation all the way to execution. So yeah, there's no lack of
Yeah.
information.
So one of the things I was going through your like LinkedIn too is that I mean like I thought I was cool because I like started 3 companies in 12 years, but you've started like 6 in the last 8. And so like Stinson was just like the beginning of kind of
Yeah.
like many companies to come. Um, Obviously it's like I feel like every company has its own story, but like maybe on like a broader level, like what what do you think was kind of the commonality between like kind of like each of the companies, and like what kept you going like continuously kind of like wanting to start these things?
Yeah, so I can go chronologically, but basically, when I had Stinson, yes, it was making money, but it was not what I was. It was not my ambition to have a service business. I always
Mm.
wanted to create a tech business, something like a startup, something cool,
Yep,
a
yep.
product. So when I started making money with Stinson, it allowed me to fund my ambition of building a tech startup. And if you look on
Mm.
my LinkedIn, that one, the first basically product that I ever built was called Predico. So I was really into social. I was really into gaming and stuff like that as a human. So I wanted to build a social game essentially, and those were super popular back then. If you could build, I don't remember what they were called, but like Candy Crush and stuff like that. All these social games or boards with friends, you'd be making like millions, if not more, right? So I essentially started funneling money from Stinson into this product. I hired a tech team, and it was really cool product. Actually, it was basically a social app that allowed you to wager with friends on the outcome of different TV related items. So, like a TV show, or
Oh,
sports, or the news, or whatnot. You could bet, like social betting, right? It's not real money, but you could bet on the outcome and basically build a score and like be in scoreboards and stuff like that. So it was really exciting, and the game was working really well. But basically, when I moved to Toronto, and I had both this Predico and Stinson going at once. There was a point where I started raising money for Predico, and I got a term sheet for an accelerator. But I lost my technical co-founder, and I
mm.
realized that finding someone to take his place and learn the code base would be a very long like stretch of time, and the accelerator was already off the table because I lost the technical co-founder. And so at that point I kind of gave up, unfortunately, because Stinson was making a lot of money and there was a lot of opportunity to grow it. And so that's the time I decided I'm going to focus my efforts on Stinson. I sold the code for Predico to someone else who was looking to build something similar. So it was my first exit, but we're talking about a very little sum of money, basically not even covering my cost, right? But it was
Yep.
cool, though. It was a cool experience. And that sort of was my first attempt at building a product. But then I really got focused on Stinson design, and I got really good at service. I built a really
Mm.
like significantly bigger team in Toronto. I got some nice offices, and I started discovering other opportunities in services. And I can talk to you a little bit about candy banners and how I got into that. But basically, in Toronto, I got to meet this guy who was a freelancer for ad agencies. And back then, he was building flash banners on the side as a sort of a gig that he was quite good at. So these ad banners, but were built in Flash back then. And
I
we
remember.
became friends over the years. And I took him to Cabarete with me. I wanted to teach him kite surfing. So we went to Dominican Republic, spent 2 weeks there. And I was seeing him working on his little laptop at night, building these banners. So I started asking him, look, what are these? Like, are these the banners we see on websites and stuff? He's like, yeah, these are built in Flash and it's very simple animations and stuff. And then I asked him how much, and he threw a number at me which I was blown away by, because presentations we were charging 1,500 on the low end, and then some very very high numbers on the high end. But there was a lot
Yep.
of work, and it requires a lot, like a project manager, an art director, some designers, and he was doing these banners on
Jeez.
his own, and he was charging like 2,500 for 5 banners. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you built those banners overnight and you made 2,500 from that? That's insane. So like the wheels started spinning in my head, and I started thinking like, can I build a business out of this? Like, can I partner with this guy who's like very good at what he's doing? I can be the business side and build something else. So I started like looking into it, and I, of course, I'm not going to give up stints in it. This was my main gig, but I started thinking, like, started putting out feelers and seeing, was this a one off with this agency, or was every agency subcontracting that type of work. And it turned out every single agency in Toronto was subcontracting Flash design because a Flash developer was
Mm,
like $80,000 a year, and they didn't want to have any staff for that, especially as it was a kind of dying technology. They didn't want to have someone doing Flash only. So they were subbing it out. And so I told my buddy, Jan, I said, look, do you want to go 50-50 on a business? I think we can build a big business out of this. Like, based on what you're charging, based on what I've seen in Toronto alone, let alone in North America, I think we could build this big. So he was down with it. I mean, he'd seen me work on Stinson, so he knew I could build something. So I basically put Stinson in like I put it under management. I kind of automated that, and I went
yep.
full steam on candy banners. And basically, we started reaching out to every single agency in Toronto, trying to figure out if they were looking for a Flash developer, etc. And within a few months, we ran into a situation where Jan was completely overwhelmed with work, and we needed to hire developers. And as I mentioned earlier, Flash developers were 80K a year. So we had nowhere near that type of money, and we didn't want to take that type of risk. So me knowing Elance and Upwork and all this stuff, I thought, why don't we try to subcontract our own work to someone else in a foreign land, right? So we put out feelers in 6 different countries, and I'm sure like the most common ones like China, India, Ukraine, and then this random little country that I knew nothing about, the Philippines, right? And we wanted to see how they would perform on a single project, what the rates were, communication, all that stuff. And man, the Filipino guy just turned around the project within overnight, right? We
Wow.
expected maybe 2 to 3 days turnaround. He turned it over overnight. He spoke perfect English. He charged a fraction of what the Indian and Chinese guys were charging. And we are like, what? Like, what is the Philippines? Like, who is this guy? He spoke fluent
Yeah.
English. We were shocked. So we started feeding him more work, and he was always delivering and always on point. Like, we barely had any feedback. And I mean, at that time, we were making probably like a 20x profit on his work with the agencies we were
Jeez.
working with. So it's like, this model is beautiful. Like, can we scale this?
Yeah.
So we told him, look, we've got much more work to give you. Can you handle it, or do you have any friends you could handle it with? So he brought on another friend, and they took it on. So for like a month and a half, we had these two guys working like day in day out on our projects, and like our agencies were super happy with us. They were giving us more deal flow. It was awesome. But we got to a point where these two guys were not enough, right? We needed to scale. And we told them, look, we know you guys have day jobs, right? Would you be willing to come full time? Would you be able to build a team with us? And they said, look, we don't know you guys. We're not going to quit our jobs. We have like managerial jobs here in Manila. Why don't you come to the Philippines? We'll meet you, set up like an infrastructure, and then we can talk. So 2 weeks later, we were in Manila. We had like an open-ended ticket. We had no idea what we were doing, where we were going. It was complete adventure. It was awesome. And that's how it all started. Like, the Candy Banners experience was really fun, and it was my first exposure to the Philippines, basically, which is where I reside now. So clearly, that path evolved
Yeah.
quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the Philippines. We met the two guys. We built a structure, built an office, and within a couple of years, we had 30 staff doing development
Wow.
in the Philippines. Yeah,
Was that your first time in Southeast Asia?
it was my first time in Southeast Asia. Yes.
Okay, so you were like you met these two guys on Elance.
Yep.
This business kind of going well, and they're like, "Hey, you got to come to the Philippines." You're like, "Sounds good." And so you and Yan went
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. We both went
And
down.
then I mean, I guess I mean this kind of begs the story of kind of like I mean Yan is one of the works with you at TendoPay now, right?
Yes.
So like, talk, how did that transition went? So you were running this business, you had this team in the Philippines. What I guess maybe before we kind of get into that, what was your first impression of Philippines and Manila? Having you mean
It
never
was
been to Southeast
madness.
Asia, you
It
just
was
get on a
absolute
plane.
madness. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, the first thing is I like to be sort of aware of what I'm doing. So I had read up a lot about the Philippines, and sort of knew the pitfalls and knew what to do and what not to do. So we weren't completely blind, right? So we arrived, and it's already chaos at the airport. We had to figure out where our hotel was, and we got like this 3 star, but a 3 star in the Philippines turned out to be this cockroach infested hotel. So there were a lot of nice hiccups on the way, but yeah, basically we landed in Makati where I still live, and we really dug it. Actually, it was a like once we figured out all the sort of madness and sort of got our bearings, it was a really beautiful place, and the people were really welcoming, really cool. It's a nice atmosphere to work in. Like, you might have noticed from how I spoke of them, but they're really hardworking people. They like to
Yeah.
deliver. They like excitement, so they love the idea of working with a team in Toronto. It was like super excited versus working for a local employer. And our employment standards are super lax compared to the employment standards in the Philippines, where there's a hierarchy. Most companies have uniforms here, so they really like the idea of working for a foreign company. And in our case, we're young entrepreneurs, so it's not like these old school methods.
Yeah.
We kind of let them do whatever they want as long as they
Yeah.
produce results, basically.
So how did you guys so talk about the transition from that to TendoPay? I mean, obviously this whole experience had to have played into that. How did you meet kind of the rest of the TendoPay crew? How did you guys get this idea? Like, talk about that transition.
Sure. So TendoPay basically is originally an idea from Casper, so our CEO. He was sort of exposed to fintech in his entire career in the Philippines, and he was noticing that there were a lot of gaps, especially in the financing and like lending space. So, knowing the growth of players like Klarna and Affirm, he wanted to figure out if there was a way to reproduce the model in the Philippines. And as it turned out, Casper was my next door neighbor in the office we had with Candy Banners. And his
Are you
boss at the
serious?
time, yeah, his boss was my best friend from university, which I actually told to go to the Philippines, and he built a business there as well. So we already knew each other for quite a while. And when Casper had that idea, he turned to myself and Jan for technology advice. Basically, at that time, we didn't plan to partner up, right? He was just consulting with us on how he should build TendoPay. And Jan and I took a look at it and thought about it and said, look, we're ready for the next project. We want to build a product. We're kind of tired of service at this point, and it just seemed like a perfect storm to, you know, go full steam ahead on a product in the Philippines with these guys. They seem to be knowledgeable about fintech, so we just decided to offer our services as full-time founders, basically.
Wait, so I mean, I feel like there, because so Casper was at Coins before. So is that when I mean, he was kind of doing a bunch of fintech stuff there. Um, and so was he working at Coins and their office was next door to you
No,
guys,
he
or like
was
was he already?
after Coins. He went to Oradian, which is
Ah,
the company my buddy sort of founded in the Philippines. It's not founded by him, but he founded the Filipino branch for it.
yep.
And Casper was working with him in those offices. Yeah.
And so you just and like they just were next door to you, and you would just see him in the hall. And I mean, apparently, I mean, I haven't met Casper in person yet, but he's like a giant. He's like super tall. So you were just like
Yes.
you kind of just
So,
made friends with him.
so in a way, yes. But like I said, he was employed by my buddy, and when I was back and forth in the Philippines, I would always hang out with my friend. And actually,
Oh.
interestingly enough, we would always play Call of Duty. And then Casper showed up one day with my buddy, and he wanted to play with us and stuff. So that's my first interaction with Casper, basically. But then we stayed friendly like I was there in and out for probably 3 years, meeting Casper every time, right? So we built a rapport over time.
And then when he kind of came this idea, he kind of came to you guys. I mean, I guess it sounds like he was kind of asking for advice initially, and then you guys kind of saw the opportunity, and like, hey, we should just all do this together.
Exactly. So he came to us for advice. Then once we gave him our advice, he kind of came to us for consulting, like hiring us as a tech consultant. But we just wanted to be more involved because we knew we couldn't just build some sort of MVP for him. It would have no value. Like, and we knew how difficult it was to hire tech talent in the Philippines. So it was kind of like, if we don't work on this, it's going to be very tough. Not that he couldn't do it, but it would be very tough to build something like that in the Philippines without a proper tech team. And it just made sense to us as well. We really liked the project. We liked the guy. We also, like Camille, we sort of met over Visio because we were all in different continents, right?
Yeah.
It just made sense. And when he spoke about the market opportunity, I had witnessed that as well because I had friends who were working in e-commerce, and I knew that payments was such a challenge in the Philippines. So, it just clicked, and I knew that there was definitely something there when he pitched it.
Well, I mean, I think that's the thing that people always have a hard time kind of like meeting co-founders and stuff. But I feel like your story is one that is like it's the best case scenario,
Hmm.
which is like you just kind of build a relationship with somebody over years and not planning to necessarily start a company, but like you just kind of get to know people, and then when something kind of comes up, right, it's like they immediately
Super
turn to the people
organic,
kind of
right?
around them, and they're like, "What do you think about this?" Right, which is awesome.
Hmm.
Um, and like, did you? Was there much the debate on your end? It sounds like you were pretty ready. You always wanted to build a product. You did it before, but you didn't get it as far as you would like it to go. So when this kind of came up, it was in the Philippines. You had already moved to the Philippines at that point,
No, I
right?
didn't. So I was still in
Or you hadn't?
Toronto,
Okay.
and it's not like we went full steam ahead like the day of, right? So I ran a couple scenarios, and I started working on some very, very, very early MVPs for TendoPay to figure out if there was even demand for the product. So I didn't jump in that easily. What I did is I built some fake e-commerce web pages when we were in Toronto, and basically we were selling random products like sneakers and things that we knew would sell, but the store was completely fake. It was like alphasales.ph or some crazy domain we bought, and we would just create a bunch of landing pages for products. And under the price, we had buy now, but we also had finance or like buy now, pay later, by this much per month or whatever. And you'd click on it, and then you'd have a sign up form. It was like a type form, right? So it's super rudimentary. It took us like a few hours to put together. And I ran probably $100 in AdWords in AdWords or in Facebook ads. I don't remember, but that goes quite a long way. Probably like 1,000 clicks in the Philippines. So once I realized that people were willing to click on finance it, and they were willing to go through an entire application flow. Back then, it was completely random questions about your salary and stuff like that. But then that's when I got the solid, like the firm go ahead on there is a market for it. People are willing to go through an application process to get this fake sneaker from this fake store. So imagine on a real one. That was when we decided that okay, I'm going to move to the Philippines and we're going to build this. There's a market for it.
Well, so I mean, that's so clever. I feel like what you're, the building the fake site thing is kind of like a tried and true kind of method, right? So
Yeah.
in the Valley, we call that like building, it's basically building fake doors and seeing if people will open the door. But you
Hmm.
guys did the like inception thing of one level deeper, which is like you made a fake door that had a fake door inside of it,
Yeah.
which is like so smart. It's like, that's awesome. I've never heard of people who built a site to test the thing for the site.
Well, I
I feel like
mean,
more people should do that.
it's a cheap way to test the market, right? Like if
Yeah.
people are not willing to give their information for financing, then forget it. Like we can move on to something else.
That's so for everybody out there, like this kind of stuff is the stuff that like if you're thinking about trying to test an idea, this is the stuff that you should be like doing. And like this is the stuff that if you are talking to like investors about and they're asking you about, like how you know that there's like traction for this or people want this, like this is the stuff that is the like best, right? You can cite me all of the Deloitte studies that you want, but the people who built the fake website to sell the fake thing to get people to sign up is like worth all of the McKinsey reports in the world. So I actually have never heard that story, and that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's cool.
So you ran, and I think the benefit in Southeast Asia too is I don't know if people know this here, but like Southeast Asia's cost per impressions and cost per clicks are way lower than like in the US and I'm sure Canada. It's
Super
like
low.
way lower. So like $100 will get you a long, long way. It's not like you need to throw like 10K at this. Like it'll get
Oh,
you a long way.
100%. 100%.
Cool. So you basically tested. So you Casper kind of was pitching this idea. You're like, okay, that seems kind of interesting. Were you running the test yourself to prove it to yourself, or kind of as a
Yeah.
group, you're like,
So
hey, let's run these things?
no, I pitched them to run this test because it was going to help me validate the product, but it was also for them. Like,
Helps everybody.
look, yeah,
Yeah, it
if
helps
this is
everybody.
going to work out, might as well know, right? But that's how
Yeah.
I'd done it before for many other projects I've done. from selling fake stuff on e-commerce to pitching projects, etc. I've always tried to test it before jumping into it. So that was a cheap way to do it. But yeah, definitely, I was doing it for myself, but it helped everyone basically.
Have you? I feel like when I've told people to do this in the past, they get nervous about like setting up a fake store. They're like, "Oh, people are gonna get mad if they like don't get the shoes and stuff." I was just like, never charge the credit card. I don't know what you guys did, but like you just don't actually charge it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, so definitely you can, like, if you're any good at analytics, you can follow people through a funnel, right? So you don't have to actually charge, as
Yeah.
you said. But I've done a lot of e-commerce stores for fun, just as hobbies, and I've always charged for the product and then returned the money. Just you validate that you get a sale, and then you refund them and tell them, look, we're out of stock or whatever. They don't care.
We're
Like,
backed up. Yeah, yeah,
and
it's
it
fine.
never hurts your market. You're selling to like 10
Uh,
or 100 people out of like millions. It's never going to affect you. It can only benefit you.
I think that's the other thing too that I we talk to founders about sometimes when they're like they want their launch to be perfect because they're
Mhm.
like, oh, we only get one chance with customers. And I was like, if your market is only the number of customers that are going to see you in your first day of launch, your market is so small. None of us should be doing this. Like you should work on it. We shouldn't invest in it. None of us should do
Yeah,
this.
I
So
agree.
um, how about I think TendoPay? So that's fascinating. I mean, it's like you on some level, it's like to meet co-founders, you almost just need to be in the game. Like you need to be around other people kind of working and stuff. We were the same. I mean, I think Brian and my brother worked at Zillow together, and
Mhm.
Brian basically was like, I need a technical co-founder. He thought my brother was good. That's how it happened. So you kind of need to be in the game. Um, where did you guys for TendoPay? Where did you guys get your first like 10 customers from? And maybe I guess talk a little bit about what the first version of TendoPay when you guys actually launched looked like.
Oh boy, the first version of TendoPay. So, okay, once we actually built a physical pilot, so an MVP that was functional, we had signed four different merchants. So some very tiny merchants, because we did, in this case, we really didn't want to burn ourselves with some bigger merchants. So we had to find merchants that didn't have so much traffic, that were willing to take another payment method that was brand new, etc. So we signed these four merchants, and we gave them TendoPay for free, so they didn't have to pay any commissions or whatnot. And to find our first clients was super straightforward. I mean, we built a very rudimentary application flow, and then we ran some Facebook ads and basically
That's it.
saying you can buy this laptop for 40,000 pesos, so like $1,000, or for 20 bucks per every 2 weeks for the next 10 years. I'm just exaggerating, but basically, when you
Yep.
advertise that on Facebook, people will click because, why not get something cheaper or for less money per month than you would upfront? And then we'd have an application flow, and we probably signed like a couple hundred clients in the first week just from running ads.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the Philippines, we're lucky that, first of all, the purchasing power is quite low, so there's a need for financing, and financial options are just very antiquated. So, if you want a loan here and you want to go to a bank, first of all, you won't find out about it on social media, or at least like 3 years ago you didn't. And just to go through an application process online was virtually unheard of, right? So people would be tempted and they just do it, and that's how we got our first clients.
Wow. So I mean, it just kind of worked right. I mean, I guess the initial stage kind of just worked right away, right? It was just like
Yeah, I mean,
you ran ads
giving
and
money to people, it's quite easy, I'll be
yeah.
honest.
I mean, it's also like I was telling my parents when we were starting kind of iterative, I was like, hey, so we got like 200 applications the first 2 months, and my dad's response was, "You're giving people money, right?" And I was like, "We're investing it." He's like, "Yeah, but you're giving them money." And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Who's not signing up for money?" Like, you know what I mean? I was like, "Fair enough. Like, good point." Um,
Same thing here.
just to kind of like just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I want to kind of like always try to wrap things up with kind of like some fun stuff. You and I talked briefly about this, so I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while. It became clear when we were working together that at some point we both played video games somewhat competitively and probably took it a little bit more seriously than we should have.
Yep.
Um, what game did you play?
So I'm a big FPS player. So I mean, what got me started really a while ago was, I don't know if you know games like Wolfenstein, and I mean, of course,
Of
GoldenEye,
course,
everyone
man.
was. Yeah, so I
Yeah,
was really
GoldenEye, Duke
big on
Nukem,
those.
all that.
Yeah, early teenagehood, I was obsessed with those games. And then I
Yep,
discovered probably the love of my life, Half Life. I became like, I played
yep,
hundreds of hours in the dark at home, and it was kind of scary and
yep,
exciting. And it was like this game that I just got obsessed over and did over and over. And that's also when I discovered forums to learn how to get by certain parts of a game. And I got addicted to the communities and stuff. So Half Life kind of changed my life. And then during high school, I started playing more like LAN games. So I was playing Quake 3 Arena, Unreal Tournament, Team Fortress, and stuff like that. And then later in high school, I discovered Counter Strike. So that's when my obsession began, and I had to play. I was always in like internet cafes, basically after school, sometimes during school, and that's kind of, you were talking about semi-competitive. So that's the Counter Strike was really what took me. And then I had to kind of stop because high school was becoming unmanageable, and I did want to get into a good university. So I gave up on it probably in the last 2 years of high school, and kind of gave up gaming for a while. And then, like, 5 6 years later, when Stinson was doing okay, I started playing games casually, and I bought a console, and I discovered Call of Duty, which I knew nothing about. It. Everyone was talking about Call of Duty. I picked it up with Black Ops 2, so super late. And wow, like playing online with people, my competitiveness came back to me, and wow, I spent so many hours on Black Ops 2. It's unreal. And it's kind of this obsessive personality where I have to become good. I have to get up the rankings.
yep,
So probably for 6 months, I played very competitively on Black Ops 2. And then I stopped completely because I started Candy Banners and I had to focus on work again. Like it wasn't like a smooth sailing like I used to. I completely stopped. And then this pandemic, actually, I bought a what is it, a PS4? Yeah, it's a PS4. I was like PS3 or PS4. So I can't keep track anymore.
PS5 is about to come out.
Yeah, so PS5 is about to come out. But I like, look, in the Philippines we had a lockdown where for 4 months nothing was open except grocery stores. So the day before
Yeah.
they shut down, I didn't know it was going to last that long. I bought a PS4 and a bunch of games, and amongst
Yeah.
those games was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, and that obsession, that addiction just came back to me. Started playing a lot, and to be honest, our business TendoPay was on standstill because our
Yeah.
president here shut down the economy, including e-commerce, and we weren't allowed to collect loans. So basically, for 3 months,
Yeah.
we couldn't issue loans, we couldn't collect loans. Our business was dead. So I was playing Call of Duty way too much, basically. I've stopped since they reopened the economy in May, but
Yeah.
that's basically my background. How about you?
Uh, I mean, I feel like now I feel like I'm just the Malaysian version of you because it was the same. I mean, it was like I played Duke Nukem, I played Wolfenstein, like all of those, like Doom, all that stuff. And
Hmm.
then Half Life was the game where it was like that kind of changed everything for me. I was like, this is a much richer experience. And then Counter Strike. I mean, I traveled around the U.S. playing in Counter Strike tournaments,
Sick.
like going to like LANs and stuff, and like uh, I had to stop when I got to college because there was about 2 semesters where I was skipping midterms because I
Hmm.
was playing on this competitive Counter Strike team, and the tournament was the same. Was like I had to miss the midterm so I can make it to a tournament,
Wow,
and so I would just like skip school on midterms to like go play in this like Counter Strike tournament,
that's
and
heavy.
like that's not kind of it was really fun, but like
Hmm.
at some point I was like, okay, I like can't do this. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I miss
And
land so
it
much.
sounds I know, right? Like,
Oh
Lance,
man,
I feel
I
like
miss them.
gamers these days, they're never going to get up to it. Like, there's something just about like bringing your computers and you're all sitting at the table and like yelling. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, Discord
it's
is
awesome.
great, but like, it's different. Um, Wait, so you playing Call of Duty on the controller?
Yeah, yeah. I transitioned
How
to
did you make
console.
that switch? Yeah,
So I made the switch with an Xbox.
Black Ops. Yeah,
Yeah, with Black Ops 2. At first, it was like, okay, I'm never gonna pick this up. I gotta get a gaming computer, whatever. But dude, you pick it up after like a few weeks. I was better with the remote than the computer. Until
Oh,
until
that's
with Modern Warfare 3, they now have cross-platform, right? So they have cross-device. Sorry, so they have PS, Xbox, and PCs, and now you realize how much better someone on a PC, how fast and accurate they are. And man, like that makes me miss it a little bit, but I can't commit to something like that. But yeah, controller
so
is very easy to pick up if you're versus a controller, basically.
yeah. I mean, I feel like you can't put people on on a mouse against people on a like that's
They
not
did
fair. Like the
that
game.
for Modern Warfare 3, right? So that's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. I had like a roller coaster of emotions as you were telling me about this because when you were like, "Oh, the controller is pretty easy to pick up," because I haven't been playing any FPS. I never touched any Call of Duty because I was like, I don't have a PC anymore,
Hmm.
right? So I was like, I'm not gonna buy a PC just to like
Yeah.
play FPSs. Like I don't want to do that. But then when you were like, "Oh, the controller, like that kind of works," I was like, "Oh no, I got a PS4 over there. Like, am I gonna do this tonight?" And
Yeah,
then
you
when you
are.
were like, "Okay, but the mouse is kind of like still there." Like, wait, so is the
But
you're
wait,
not? Are
so
you?
you have forums? Sorry,
Yeah.
you have options to remove people with PCs basically, and just to play with other PS4. Yeah,
Okay. And you're playing. What are you playing now?
Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 3.
Okay. Modern Warfare. Okay. Am I gonna get into that? If I get into this game, I don't know if you got a Discord channel, but we're gonna have to. I'm gonna get it, and then I'm gonna be like, "Hey Tim,
Yeah, yeah, I'm
like
on Discord.
we got to get into this Discord channel. We got to.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to suffer through me for the first like
Oh, dude, no. First of
couple
all, I
playthroughs.
haven't played in the last 4 months, so it goes up
Okay.
and down, right? Like you build it up,
Yeah.
and I never got back to anywhere close to where I was during Call of Duty Black Ops 2, and even then I was nowhere near my Counter Strike time. So I just devolved.
By the way, I played Counter Strike with a friend like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I just like loaded it up, and he was like, "Oh, dude, I want to see you like play Counter Strike," and I was like, "All right, sure." So I like loaded it up. Um, I'm terrible.
Which
Like
one did you play?
the CS. What's the one
CS:GO.
now? CS:GO. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it feels a little bit different, but like it's funny because I know where to go still. Like I
Mhm.
still remember how to play, right? So it's like, yeah. People are gonna come out of here, and you want to be here, and there's this funny spot here. Like I remember all that stuff, but I just like can't hit anything. And like I just don't have any of that down anymore, right?
And
So
people nowadays use aimbots and stuff. It's kind of not fun to play.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks. I appreciate you taking time to tell us about your story.
Yep.
Uh, yeah. So
Happy to.
thank you. I'm sure maybe we'll play Call of Duty sometime. But thanks.
Let me know. All right. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Ken. What I did is I built some fake e-commerce web pages when we were in Toronto, and basically we were selling random products like sneakers and things that we knew would sell, but the store was completely fake. It was like alphasales.ph or some crazy domain we bought, and we would just create a bunch of landing pages for products. And under the price, we had buy now, but we also had finance or like buy now, pay later, buy this much per month or whatever. And you'd click on it and then you'd have a sign up form. It was like a type form, right? So it's super rudimentary. It took us like a few hours to put together. And I ran probably $100 in AdWords or in Facebook ads. I don't remember, but that goes quite a long way. Probably like 1,000 clicks in the Philippines. So once I realized that people were willing to click on finance it and they were willing to go through an entire application flow, back then it was completely random questions about your salary and stuff like that. But then that's when I got the solid, like the firm go ahead on there is a market for it. People are willing to go through an application process to get this fake sneaker from this fake store. So imagine on a real one. That was when we decided that okay, I'm going to move to the Philippines and we're going to build this. There's a market for it.